We're back on What the Funk, and I have my guy, Nick Hegeman, the CEO, founder, entrepreneur of PaintJet. Really, really fun story, super disruptive, innovative technology. I haven't seen any competition to it. Super excited to see how everything goes for PaintJet, Nick and his crew in oil and gas. We'll get into all of that here, but we were just talking about this right before. We're here at the end of the short Labor Day week, and both of us are just shaking our heads like, you'd think you get a little break, you get a 4-day work week. Somehow the 4-day work weeks are the craziest, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's you miss your planning day. Then everything from the weekend rolls over on Tuesday, so you're already behind, which means you're playing catch up on Wednesday and your week's already over.
Exactly. But you did have one bit of advice that I think I'm going to start heeding next time we have one of these 3-day weekends, which is move your Monday meetings to Friday instead of moving them to Tuesday, because you get back and you shut your brain off. I was up in Breckenridge over the weekend with my family. My brain was completely shut off, didn't check email. And then Tuesday hit me like a ton of bricks and I was stacked up all day. Now I'm with it. Like now I'm good getting going, and it's 1 o'clock on a Friday. And after this, I'm going to start slowing down. So move your Monday meetings to Friday and holiday weeks. That's Nick's great advice. But I want to ask you the question, Nick, that I ask everybody that comes on this podcast. I've wanted to have you on for a while, so this is super fun for me. Who are you, man? Who is Nick Hegeman?
I think for me, I mean, at my core, big family man, and really just like to build. And so that's really what we're doing at PaintJet. Fortunate enough that we get to do both. You look at the two priorities. Number one for me, it's my family, and number two, it's you get to build professionally, and sometimes you don't always get those as the one and two as they should be, but you do the best you can. And so what we're doing at PaintJet, in terms of the building, is really allows us to use robotics in construction, and really solve the true issue at the heart of construction, which is the labor shortage. And so being able to do that with technology and bringing true value adds to a variety of industries in the construction space is pretty exciting. And, I'm lucky that I get to do that.
Yeah, well, we'll get into PaintJet and all that stuff, but I want to talk about you and what makes you tick, and you growing up. Are you from Indiana? I know you went to Butler, which is in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I went to Butler, so born in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
So my whole family is part of Steelers Nation. Grew up, but very quickly moved to the cornfields of Indiana.
Mm.
And so through that, was really lucky with my family. Typical small town America. Growing up, then it had always been engineering inclined, and so tried to get as far away as I possibly could from home for college, and ended up going to school 20 minutes down the road.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, no, what it was I wanted to do two things going into college. And number one, get set up for a future as a hardware entrepreneur, and then number two, I wanted to play Division I soccer. And so what that tactically meant is I needed to get an engineering degree,
Mm-hmm.
and the only Division I soccer program that would let me play and also had a engineering program was Butler. And so cast a bunch of lines, and those are the only ones that bit. So that's where I went.
Which, if I'm doing the math on this, I think when you went to Butler, it was around the time that Brad Stevens was the coach, and they were really emerging from, like, the basketball program was like making the Final
Yeah, no,
Four.
it was 09, 010, or not, and it was like my senior year was the year. It was Duke and
Yeah.
Butler in downtown Indianapolis, and was able to scrounge up some tickets to go to that game.
Wow.
And so that was cool. Also part of it too was the funny thing. So that's it. You had like the famous Gordon Hayward shot that missed
I was
by a
just gonna
couple
say,
inches,
yeah, thought that
which
was
is
in.
really interesting if you ever hear him talk about it. And he's gone on to bigger and better things. And his perspective on it is, I'm actually glad it didn't go in. because my whole life would have been defined by that moment, and that
Yeah.
would have been like the pinnacle of my life. Since then, he's gone on, been very successful in NBA, and he's grown and developed that way that he never like it never would have come close to that one defining moment when he was a teenager.
That's I'd never heard that, and that's super fascinating. Of course I was going to bring it up without trying to break your heart about it, but it's sort of one of those things where I don't think you really expected to be there anyway, and then you're playing against Duke, and like, what a David versus Goliath concept. My wife went to Duke, so I watched that game with her, so I'm rooting for Duke. I mean, I really wasn't rooting for
Yeah,
Duke.
yeah,
Let's
you
be
are.
honest.
You're. Everyone in America was rooting for Butler, but you were rooting for Duke. It's okay.
Kind of, and and I saw him put that shot up, and I'm like, that's going to go in, and it just
So,
bounces
so
off.
we were about mid court, and it was going up, and we're like, man, that's got a chance. That's got, and then it hit the backboard, and so many times it hits the backboard like that and goes in.
Right, and just dum, dum.
Yeah.
So that's cool. So I don't think Butler's that big of a school. So you probably saw these guys on campus, and it wasn't like this. You're not going to
No,
USC or
it was.
Indiana.
Yeah, I think we had like 4,000 kids. Now this was also before you had. This was right before you had all the conference consolidation. So we were still in the Horizon League, so mid major. But that thing you said we weren't expected to be there, and dude, that we did, and
Yeah.
that was a mindset throughout the Butler athletics department. It was gritty, not pretty. We're going to grind you. We're going
Mm.
to outwork you, and we're going to get a result. So I think it was surprising to a lot of people, but it wasn't. You know, it was. Did we know we were going to go to the championship game? No. Did we think we had a shot and could beat anyone we faced? Yeah, and I think that's just part of growing up in competing in that environment.
Yeah, and also just sort of that, like, in a humble way, though,
Mhm.
right? Like, not with the hint of ego, which is just very, very Midwest. So you played soccer at Butler
Mhm.
Division One. I'm sure that was fun. You got your degree, and then you started working at like College Pro Painters or something like that, right? What?
No, so that's actually really where my career kind of took a left. Coming out of college, I knew that I needed to improve my sales skills,
Okay.
and so I ended up taking a technical sales job with ExxonMobil. And that is so really you're working just really top tier professionals,
Yeah.
really smart people, really good company, and it's you're looking at here's how you sell total cost of ownership. If it's this type of sale, if you're looking on the automotive side, it's hey, here's how you make more money by selling premium brands. So a pretty
Hmm.
well-rounded sales education, and then after 5 years, had my was ready to take this step into you know fully becoming an entrepreneur. And this is also one of the things where it was, as a first time entrepreneur, you make a ton of mistakes. And I just, I didn't feel comfortable making those mistakes on someone else's dime. Like
Nice.
I, I had to pay for those. And so my wife and I are getting ready to have kids. And it's also a piece where it's like, once you have kids, it's not really about you. It's about taking care of your family and things
Yeah.
like salary, benefits, healthcare, pension, all that stuff matters.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I got to do something. I got to jump now or I'm not jumping for 25 years.
You
And
saw it.
so looked at a bunch of different options. And the intent was always that this was going to be the first company,
Yeah.
not the last. And so I ended up starting a CertaPro Painters just in the north suburbs of Nashville, which is where I was based out of for ExxonMobil. And it's the process is they take people outside of paint, outside of construction, and teach them how to run a painting business.
Sure.
And so got that, and it's basically it's like you start at zero, grow to 1.5, and then uh, at that time it can start spinning off cash where you can essentially hire someone to run it for you, and then it spits off cash, and then you go do the next thing. What I didn't expect was how quickly the need and opportunity for something like PaintJet would come along. um, from day one, the labor shortage hits you in the face. Like there's just physically not enough people to do the work that needs to be done. It's not a
Sure.
challenge to sell; it's a challenge to fulfill it. And that really came to a head. We're painting 150,000 square foot warehouse. I got to let go of the crew in the middle of it because sometimes that just happens. And it's myself, my wife, my brother, my parents, and we're all painting this warehouse by iPhone light to meet customer deadline. And it's like we go through that, and it's like, all right, if this ever happens again, I'm getting divorced, and I don't want to get divorced. So I'm an engineer. There's got to be something out there that can make sure we never have to do this again. And that's really where PaintJet came from.
So what year are we talking about? So you had this idea, you're like, okay, the issue with painting is not demand, it's not sales, it's humans. It's literally finding enough people to do the work and not get burned out and get the job done. And you ultimately end up having to have your family do it, which I'm sure, your wife must have loved
That was
that.
not fun. Well, just put it
Okay.
that way. That was not fun. Like
So
my wife, I think was 6 or 7 weeks pregnant at the time, and she picked up the wrong paintbrush. We're like, nope, you're done. Get up.
yeah, and
Yeah,
going
we're
on
like,
a
we're
ladder.
not doing this.
No, I wouldn't have my wife on a ladder at 6 weeks pregnant, all that.
Yeah.
So you realize you're like, there has to be a better way, and your engineering mindset kicks in. So like, what year are we talking about that the
So
idea
this was
hatched?
probably, so I started the franchise end of 2016. So this is probably either it was probably mid end of 2017, because you start off cutting your teeth on smaller residential jobs, and then you grow into commercial work. And so this was one of our earlier commercial projects. So this is probably the end of 2017. And then at the same time, I graduated college for a little bit, so they start pinging you about how can you donate and all this stuff. I was like, well, I'm a starting entrepreneur, so I don't have any money, but I'm willing to help out and support any way I can. And so they said, well, would you be interested in sponsoring a senior design course? Cool, I've got this problem. What can you come up with?
Mm,
And and the students, they came back, and it wasn't perfect, but it was something that was plausible, and it cost like $500, not 500,000. And so it was like, okay, there's something here. Like there's something that we can do. And then so we took that was spring of 2018. I was still getting the business really settled up and running, and going through all of those first time entrepreneur challenges. Um, and then so and then it was just like every semester we would have a new group of students, and they would continue to iterate on it. So we did that through
wow.
about 2020. And then it got to a point where it's like, hey, we've kind of taken this thing as far as we can, without outside capital. I was working on it with one of the my colleagues I had worked at CertaPro. Previously, he was working on operations with corporate, so him and I were already working kind of together on this. Then he
Hmm.
left, and we stayed in contact, still working on this thing, because at the time it was just this thing. And then COVID happens, and I've got to furlough. I've got to furlough my team, because it was like, hey, we couldn't go into people's houses. Like it just everything was shut down.
Were painting jobs just not happening during COVID? Like, what was that like in
It
this type
it
of business?
was it was pretty weird. It was, some people were, some people weren't. Um, it, and then depending on the area that you showed up with, like if you showed up with a mask in the wrong area, your sales ratio went down. If you
Wow.
didn't show up with a mask in the wrong area, like you got kicked out. So it was just like a weird time for home services in general. And then it would get to the point where we were trying to protect our painters, and some homeowners would say, you're not allowed to wear masks in here. Um, and so it was just a pretty challenging environment. And then everyone's scared about what's going to happen. There's a bunch of uncertainty, so
Yeah.
everyone's expensive. Like no one's paying anything, and they're like, "Well, I'm already home anyway, so I actually have time, so I can do Like our whole thing was, hey, we do painting, you do life. Well, life wasn't happening, therefore they could do their own painting.
Sure.
But then you had some commercial projects where they had already budgeted everything. And so that was still moving ahead.
And they're like, what better time than now? There's nobody in the building.
Yeah,
So
it's like we don't have logistics, we don't have students, we don't have any of this time. So let's just go ahead and get this done now.
so
And so what we ended up doing, I actually brought my team back from furlough a little bit early, probably before we should have. But the reason why we did that is so that I could go on a road show with our PaintJet robot at the time. And
which
so
which the PaintJet robot was what was built at Butler by college
yeah,
students,
yeah, that
right?
was built at Butler, and the very first one, and then we also had some worked on. Had a summer intern. She came in and converted it from like physically manual triggers to electrical systems, those type
Yeah.
of things, and then but it had gotten basically to the point where it's like this is as far as we can take it without outside funding, and so we had to go try and get checks and those type of things, and so it was like, well, we ain't doing anything else if we're gonna do it now, like let's just do it now. And that's we did. It was the summer of 2020. It was kind of actually like the second go around of COVID. Actually, if you look at the shutdowns, like you had the first initial shutdown, and then everyone kind of opened up again, and then the second wave happened, and we were essentially being chased across the country by second wave COVID shutdowns. And it was
What a time.
Nashville to Arkansas to Houston to Phoenix. We broke down coming around the bend at El Paso because we had just gone. We had taken my wrapped GMC Acadia that had a 3,000. Allegedly, it had a 3,000-pound towing capacity, but going up incline in 120-degree heat, it petered out pretty quick. So broke down in El Paso. Spent the weekend fixing the truck. We go on to Phoenix, then we go to LA, San Francisco, Salt Lake, and then come back Salt Lake City, Kansas City, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and then came back home to Nashville. And was those scenarios where it's like the technology doesn't work, all our demos are trash, but every time we walk into an office, we walk out with the deposit check.
Right.
And it's like one of these things where it's the problem that we solved was so visceral to these business owners that they were giving us money just hoping that we could solve it. And that's really when we knew we had something real, and that's when we went all in on it.
So, and by going all in, you mean, all right, now I'm going to raise funds. I'm going to get a better robot to do these painting
Yeah,
jobs
it
and make
wasn't
this
just that.
real.
It was also, hey, I need to stop spending time at CertaPro. It
Yeah.
was, it's the team. My team needs to run it on their own. Like I can't be spending any time, and then I probably need to start looking at selling it. And so we started that process. I was real fortunate. I actually had a really good team in place, and so they were able to. And that was kind of the trial run too. Is that those 3 weeks that I was gone, like they were running the business,
Yeah.
and they did really well, and that kind of laid the seeds for what ended up being a management buyout. So I actually ended up, after we talked, said, "Hey, is this something you want to do? Here's where I'm kind of leaning, and we think you've done a good job running the business already. So why don't you just run the business permanently?" And so we started laying the seeds for that, and I think it was a little while later after we had raised money, formally agreed and had a structured deal. So I went through that. But yeah, so like all in is not just raising money. I mean, it's like I had to completely transition out of my first business because it was also a thing where it's you start looking at the value of what you're doing, and is my time really need to be spent on this small business where the real opportunity is here. And it's like it's not all my money, this is other people's money, And so, you do have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure they get taken care of.
What was the process of fundraising like for you? Because you're it sounds to me like you're balancing a family and going on the road and selling a business while you're also raising money to improve what you've already kind of built and iterated on. How was that received? And was it a big roadshow? Did you have to fly out to various investors? They come to you? Were they like traditional tech investors or different types? Like, how did that process go
It was
down?
kind of all over the place. And this is actually one of the things we did benefit from COVID, because it had made remote pitching normal.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to see it. I didn't see any of them actually in person. I don't think I met any of our investors in person for probably a year. Um, and then that actual process too was pretty interesting. So we're in Nashville, not Silicon Valley, not New York, Boston, your hot spots, especially not for hardware. Um, and so there was, and I really didn't know what I was doing either in terms of navigating that
Yeah.
whole scene. And so it was learning. It's like, okay, you got angels, you've got institutional. There's a difference there. You've got different subclasses within angels. Um, Being Southeast, East Coast angels were most of the ones we were talking to. It's more of a kind of a base hit type mindset, whereas West Coast, it's more of a home run. And so there was this whole, here's what we think the business needs, but that's not exactly what we think the investors want to hear. But then they said no anyways. And so it ended up being like, okay, well, we're not getting a check anyways. Everyone's saying no, so we might as well do what's best for the business and go in all in on that.
Yeah.
And so for us, that was owning the service. And that was one of the things, like, especially in construction, you have a ton of reasons why selling the widget, selling the robot outright is just like not feasible in the vast majority of cases. And said, if this is going to work, we've got to use it to take giant chunks of market share. But if we're successful on that, that's a really outsized outcome. And so by going through, eventually we got introduced to a smaller institutional investor that totally got it, took a chance on us, and wrote us our first institutional check. We actually had an institutional check before we had any angel investors.
Hmm.
Which is a little bit different. And then once we got that first check, then the rest of the round closed up pretty quickly.
Yeah. And you already knew how to get new business from your time at CertaPro, right? So like you
Yeah.
knew
I
who
mean,
to
it's like
approach.
and that's the other thing too, is painting in general is very niche. Most investors, like, they barely know construction. They certainly don't know painting, which is probably one of the smallest of the 34 trades out there. And so it was actually pretty difficult for a lot of them to do diligence just what we're doing, because the closest they may have is an LP that's a large general contractor.
Sure.
But even them, they're like, we don't care about painting. That's 1% of our build out.
Right.
So there was always this question in terms of how big is this market?
This is really interesting because for me, right, being in oil and gas, I didn't realize how big of a deal painting actually is until you and I had the conversation, and then I started talking to some people in my network. Oil and gas, I think, is a perfect use case for why PaintJet makes sense, because it's a people issue, and these are
Yeah.
companies with assets in Appalachia, in the middle of nowhere, in California that are hard to get to, in Alberta, internationally, West Texas, Eastern New Mexico, random remote places in Colorado and Utah, where, North Dakota, where the issue is finding people. It's,
Yeah.
hey, we need a crew to paint these tanks to stay in compliance with the regulatory needs, and we can't get a crew of painters up here. So then what you end up doing is going to a city like Houston and then flying a crew of people up there for very manual blue collar work, and then you're on a wait list. That's not going to be the
Right.
highest priority job.
Yeah. And it's also this piece too, where it's like a lot of these remote locations, you have, your weather can change rapidly. Like, you're up in
Right.
North Dakota, weather's an issue. You probably have 2-3 months of good painting weather.
Yep.
And not only is it a big deal from a regulatory standpoint, but it's also just a risk mitigation standpoint. I mean, you've got 80,000 barrels of product in this container. If you start getting rust, you're contaminating that product. If the paint starts falling off, and now like you're contaminating millions and millions of dollars worth of product.
It's a risky proposition. So you've decided like you're going to pursue certain verticals, and
Yep.
obviously like the commercial real estate market makes a ton of sense. You go out, you paint huge warehouses and large swaths that require paint jobs. Talk to me a little bit specifically about the use case in oil and gas, the types of companies that contract with PaintJet, and why you're bullish on being in this industry.
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things that what the technology is good at painting one product, large areas, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, very consistently. It's not going to be good for architectural purposes. Like it's not going to look pretty. You don't need it
No,
to have a bunch of designs on it, but it needs to apply one product very consistently over and over again. The other parts of that, so we look at, hey, what are good applications for that? Big flat walls are a good application,
sure.
and now big cylinders are another really good application. And then you look at some of the byproducts that we get from just how we get our system to work, and there's, in addition to the consistency, you have a lot of like we're always taking environmental readings. We're
Right.
taking temperature readings. We're taking wind conditions. We're taking ambient temperature. I mean, we are continuously tracking all of these things. We're taking before and after pictures, right? Because the system needs to be able to see what it's going to paint. So we've got to
Yeah.
take pictures and video of it before it can even paint. Okay, well now you have just documented what the base condition is. And then after you paint it, well, you need to go to the next area. Well, how do you know what the next area is? Well, you look at what you just painted. So just by navigating, okay, now you have your after pictures. And so you have this level of detail and documentation that you never really had before. And the consistency, we're able to apply 6 to 8 mils thick. It's a math problem. If you ever watch crews paint, hey, they're going to be super consistent that first hour. After an hour of waving your arm, like you get tired.
Especially in the sun.
Yeah. And so you get tired. And every single time you have to move the lift to get to a different section, that's something else that you have to do. That takes you out of workflow. So what that means is you were trying to minimize the amount of times that you move the lift basket. Okay. So instead of painting like what's right in front of you, now you start reaching out. And now instead of being perfectly perpendicular to the surface, now you're off at 80-degree angles and you're losing 90% of the product to the atmosphere.
Yikes. Yeah.
And so
And that's a problem.
and that's the piece too. It's like, and then these are not cheap products. Like multi-component high solids products, you're looking at 100, $200 a gallon, versus traditional latex paint's going to be anywhere from 25 to $50 a gallon. And what we've seen is we're seeing a 30% reduction. So, we can apply more product to the surface while actually using less paint because we just don't have the overspray and lossing environment that you traditionally run into.
Interesting. So talk about the PaintJet, the robot itself, right?
Yep.
So this is you somebody says, "Yeah, okay, I'm having a hard time finding a crew. I like your price. I'm going to fly you out to, Midland and we're
Mhm.
going to take you out to one of our wells." What do? You deploy a couple of people to go along with it, and is it a lift and the robot and the paint with it? Like what's the human intervention? What does it look like? What does a job look like with this product?
Yeah. So the easiest way to think of how to deal with PaintJet is you you currently deal with painting contractors. We are a licensed painting contractor. We just have a better paintbrush than anyone else.
Mm,
And instead of a crew of 4 to 6, you're looking at a crew of 2 to 3. Um, the way that we access, and this is one of the unique things about our technology, is it works in conjunction with industry standard man lifts. And so these are the man lifts that are already going to be on site.
Right.
And so you've got our system. It's like it fits in the back of a 6x12 trailer. We pull up on site. Our people, they own the process, they own setup, and then they plug it. They'll connect it to the man lift, and then they will be able to control both the man lift and our system via remote control.
Mm,
Big difference is instead of being in the basket, they're actually safely on the ground.
mm.
And then which improves safety overall. I don't know if you've ever been in one of these lifts, but it's like if you go over a bump, these things turn into a catapult.
Nice. I can
And
picture
they're
it.
super jerky, and all of their internal electronics have been completely retrofitted and spliced up. So because we bypass all of those systems, there's a plug-in in the back. We bypass all of that, and we just get like it's just a way safer way to control and position these. Plus, you get the employee out of what is a very toxic chemical.
Right.
And it's like they're just looking up and pressing the start button, and then it applies the paint. And so now before that, we do have to prep it. You're probably looking at, and we do that traditional methods, traditional abrasive blasting. I think you'll see that change to adding that as a service offering or part of our robotic solution in 2025.
Hmm.
And the reason why that's the case is because painting is actually one of the more difficult things to automate. You have a fluid that's continuously trying to change to a solid, and you have to apply it plus or minus a thousandth of an inch.
I hadn't thought about that.
At
That's a good way to
probably
put it.
3,000 psi.
Yeah, major power. So
Yeah.
this is
So by able to do that, all we have to do is switch out the hoses and pumps for abrasive blasting
right.
because we already have the control required for painting.
Now, in theory, and if you look on your website, this is probably what you're doing. This is not just restricted to the United States or Canada or whatever, right? This is a challenge that could be solved worldwide. Are you
Yeah.
seeing other markets moving more quickly toward adopting this solution? Are you seeing it happen faster here? Are you guys an international business, domestic? What's your business plan in terms of geographical location?
So we do have international engineering offices already. We're focusing right now, opening up in our oil and gas efforts in Houston. But I'd say within 12 months after that, you end up being global pretty quick, and we've already know how to operate globally from an R&D perspective. So I think now that's not the same as operating commercially, but operating internationally is something that's already in our DNA.
Mm. And I know you were in Taiwan not that long
Mm-hmm.
ago, right? I saw some of the
Yep.
videos of that. Talk about the man versus machine stuff that you guys were doing.
That's pretty cool, and I think that's one of the reasons that we're pretty excited about this is we've been hearing that robots are coming for what, like 20, 30 years?
More than that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then, if they've been coming, where are all of the documentation that robots can beat humans? And in the construction environment, there's not that many. Maybe one or two companies, but for the most part, it's isolated to where humans can't operate.
Right.
And so, our ability to actually put some proof in the pudding, so to speak, is that no, we are actually able. Our teams using robots are exponentially faster than traditional painting methods. So it's not just where you can't get people, but it's even where you can get people, you still need to be able to use robots. And I think that's the big thing, especially in construction, that gives us license and a reason to exist is, hey, we're actually showing and using that robots are effective in the field. And like we've had robots in manufacturing settings, but to get robots to be doing actual trade work um, in the uncontrolled environment of a construction site, it's really, really hard. And for
Yeah.
us to be able to showcase and document that, I think is very powerful, not only to us, but I think the direction that robotics are going as a whole.
Yeah, I think humans are just skeptical in general of robots or that AI can do something much better, right? You have to prove it. You have to show
Yeah.
people. And that's what some of your videos doing with the product. I'm going to transition here in a moment to some of the entrepreneurship lessons learned. But I'm curious, like, you're a strategic guy despite having to be tactical with getting this job done on this date in this
Mhm.
location. But like, where do you envision this company going? Are you going to stick with paint? Are you going to try to master, robotics for other trades? Do you just continue
Yeah,
to refine and get better? Where do you
that's a
go?
really good question. It's something we talk about every day. Our focus is really nailing painting first. Um, that being said, and this I think a case in point is oil and gas. The painting contract includes things that are not painting related specifically. So abrasive blasting is included in the painting contract. If you want the painting contract, you got to own abrasive blasting. So what we look is painting and paint adjacent type trades. And so everything that's included in that painting contract, the big bulk stuff that we can automate 80-90% of it, that's where you're going to see an evolution. And also when you look at how we've structured the system itself, it's really about, essentially we make an end effector. And there are components that you can switch out on this end effector that you can do things other than painting. And that has always been how we have been designed,
Yeah.
and how our engineering roadmap um, has been from the very beginning. It starts off with paint sprayers, because that's something very clear, and that's also a core competency that we have, just from an operational standpoint. But if you're applying paint, you can apply other fluids, so you can do pressure washing, um, and if
Right.
you can do that, then you can do abrasive blasting, which technically is a solid in a fluid suspension of air, and you're accessed the exact same ways. And then if you're creating a documentation and in an environment and you're able to access these things, that gives you license to go do the next piece, whether it's, just an inspection in and of itself, right? Like we have inspection components we're already building out. And so being able to separate that. So there's a lot of, I guess, very valuable steps that we can continue to build on once we document and prove capability with paint.
Right.
And that's the other thing too, is none of that stuff happens unless we get painting right.
Right.
And so until there's acceptance and documentation on that, that's all we're doing.
Yeah. 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 Got to prove it. Want to pivot a little bit to entrepreneurship, right? And so you
Mhm.
talked a little bit about how you always knew that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, and some of those early challenges that you experienced, right? Whether it's your wife or your family members painting, or leveraging a robot that maybe wasn't as great as obviously what your product is today. But tell me what you would tell young Nick Hegeman, the 21-year-old version of yourself. If you could go back and make suggestions around, all right, kid, you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to run your own business. If you knew then what you know now, what would you tell him?
I think it's two things. One, just start earlier.
Hmm.
Um, at the end of the day, it's like, unless you're talking with customers or you're touching the product or using the product, it's all theory and it doesn't really matter. And then the other piece is probably just trust yourself a little bit more. I think we're all pretty smart people, and I think there's some stuff out there that you kind of have hunches on, or you see certain things. You're like, this doesn't quite make sense. But there's a bunch of smart people out here, and this is the way that it's going about. So maybe they do. No, that's stuff that you're seeing. You're probably right on it. So lean into those things a little bit more, and probably with a little bit more conviction.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's good. The start earlier thought is interesting, and that definitely resonates with me. My idea for Funk Futures really was hatched in like 2017. I didn't act on it till 2021.
Yeah.
But in doing that, I think I was kind of further along when I launched it, but I also missed out on that time. I had to fail and learn lessons 21, 22, right? And be a little bit behind. I would have figured those out pre-COVID. But nonetheless, we kind of all have our own path.
Yeah, and I think the path is gonna like you're gonna have opportunities no matter what. You're gonna have challenges no matter what. You're gonna have learning opportunities no matter what. Um, the path that you take is the path that you take. What you make of that, that's up to you. And for me, it was I got to really hone in my sales skills for five good solid years. And the way that I say is I'm an engineer. I don't really like people, but they buy stuff from me, so I guess I can sell. Um, and so like if I'm not doing that for 5 years, then I don't have that capability. And so I'm probably not as good as I would be in that specific skill set as a CEO and entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Um, there are things that owning your own business as a small business, you learn a lot of stuff. But there are things that venture back versus small business are totally different beasts. So you may have some bad habits you got to break. You may have some opportunities to grow. But then there's also some basics, blocking and tackling. You're going to be ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and I have a lot of thoughts on this now because you're saying, okay, so maybe you don't love people, right? You're an engineer by trade, but you have to manage people in your business, right? You can't be
Yeah,
a robotic CEO, right? So
yeah.
how do you do that? And especially with the remote workforce,
Mhm.
right? How do you sort of vet out getting the right people on your team and having that implicit level of trust, or is it just a challenge?
I think working remote is a challenge. It represents opportunities. Um, right? Like we're not constricted by geography, so we can get really good people anywhere in the world. Now we do need to be more intentional um, about that culture that we're driving, in that compatibility. And it's just like it's almost like, hey, it needs to be a budgeted line item that you're spending time together as a company because it's very easy to get off on your silos. And then the other piece too is just leaning into your authenticity as a person and a leader. Um, that that tends to make a difference. Now I say I don't like people as I don't like small talk.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and that's totally different than just being on an authentic person. And here's what we're about. Here's what we do. And here's what we want to go build. And those are the things that really good people like you get alignment on those type of things. And it makes it a lot easier.
On the painting robot, are
Mhm.
there other companies doing this? Like, do you have
Yeah.
competition? You say there are other companies out there.
Yeah. I mean, the opportunity in painting is pretty significant. And there are other companies trying to do this. The challenge, and I think where we're unique, is that we're vertically integrated and we own the service.
Yeah,
And there's a thousand reasons why people don't want to do that. It's scaling service businesses is difficult.
yeah,
Services in general have variable margins. Your scaling ability isn't as isn't as efficient as just sending additional lines of code.
sure.
There are real challenges behind it. You also have to have experience, and there's not a lot of people like if you don't have the operational experience in construction, you're going to struggle. And so that's why there really is this perfect storm with us in terms of our operational experience and our technical backgrounds and capabilities, which give us the ability to actually deliver the service. And then after that, it's about scaling it,
Right.
and
Just going to ask
which
that.
which represents its own challenges, but also its own opportunities because in construction, like those revenues can stack themselves very quickly.
For sure.
And when you're looking at, hey, if you look from a SaaS business, hey, we did 1 million ARR, we did, we're trying to get to five, we think we got a shot at 100 million ARR. Well, there's construction companies out there. Like, I did 1.5 million with my CertaPro business in like 2 years.
Right.
Like, you look at the cost to paint these tanks, they're $250,000 a pop, and they take 2-3 months. And so you're looking at significant revenue. I mean, the U.S. Navy spends $3 billion a year painting ships.
Mm.
I mean, they're like, you start getting into construction and the revenues stack themselves very quickly. And by using technology in a meaningful way, you can start realizing technology business metrics with construction revenues. And the only way you can get that is by owning the service.
But don't you think people are going to figure that out though? Right? Like, I mean, you figured it out, and it clearly makes logical sense to me because it sounds a little bit like the Holy Grail. You're talking about crazy margins, lots of revenue, and a repeatable business model with demand. Like, that sounds as good as it gets.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Like,
Yeah,
scaling, I mean, it's the process is hard. And that's, I think, one of the things is that managing the process is just as important as the technology. And so you've got to be good at a lot of things. And that is very challenging for startups in general. The other thing that you look at larger companies is they don't have the incentives to be innovative the way that a smaller company does.
for sure.
And this gets back to licensing, work history, financial strength that's required for insurance and bonding purposes, those type of things. Like, you get to a certain size and you're the only player anyways. And the customer, they really don't, on the face of it, the customer doesn't care about technology. They just want their tank painted.
They want the job done, right? They have a mandate to get it done, and if they don't, they're probably going to get
And
fined.
historically, construction businesses are lower margins.
Yeah,
And there's also a slow pay period. So typically, any
yeah,
profit that you do have on the job is actually just fronting the next job.
yes.
And if you screw up one job, that can be your entire year, and that can put you out of business. And so, given the risk profile of introducing new technology before it's perfect, which you have to do if it's gonna and if it's ever gonna get good, it's just really, really tough to do that.
Okay, maybe it's not the Holy Grail, but anyways, I respect you for going after it for sure.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
mean, it's like the end result, it definitely works, but it's not as easy and simple as like, oh, this just sounds too good to be true.
do the jobs occur like on weekends, at night, like, or is there like a sweet spot when these happen? Is it a 9 to 5 type of thing? When does the work get performed?
Yeah, typically it is a 9 to 5, but it's always weather permitting.
Right.
In future iterations, could we do something like operate at night when no one else is there? Sure, that's stuff we've thought about. But it gets back to, it's really about taking the employees and partners that we do have and just really amping up their productivity rates and their capabilities. And so it's, you have to operate when humans are, designed to operate optimally. And so it's you're looking at normal hours, which, also turns into, it just ends up being a better job too, because it's, you have normal hours. You don't have to work 70 hours a week to get the job done.
To
You
do the
can work
same
normal
job.
hours and get the job done. You can be more consistent about it. Like, I mean, your physical condition and how you feel when you're performing a manual task matters on the output and the quality. So if you're having an off day, well, shoot, you could be having to paint that thing twice because you're not going to pass inspection, or you might not be profitable that day and you got to send someone home.
Do you get any referral business where somebody like literally drives by you guys painting a tank with a robot and they're like, "Hey, what is that? I want to do that on one of my tanks." Does that ever
Yeah,
happen?
no, that is like, it's one of those things that when you see it, it just ends up being like, yeah, this is the way we need to be doing it.
Yeah,
And the other way, it's just dumb to not do it that way.
it just
And
makes
that's what we saying.
sense.
It's like, when it works, it's so obvious that it really sells itself.
Love it.
And
Nick,
but until you see it, it sounds too good to be true. That'll never happen.
which is why you've got these videos, especially the man versus machine stuff and painting actual like tanks and the real work, because
Yeah.
especially in oil and gas, everybody's from Missouri. I like to say you got to show them. You got to show them. Nick, this was fun, man. I think you dropped a couple nuggets. I'm looking forward to listening to this one, not only the notes on entrepreneurship, but looking back in like a year and seeing how things evolve for
Yeah,
you guys,
absolutely.
right, in a competitive market. But where can people find you if they want to reach out? Where can people find your company?
Yeah, so website paintjet.com, also on LinkedIn. Most of our focus is there. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not on a ton of Instagram or Twitter. Our customers aren't there, don't value it.
Mm,
I don't really either. So we LinkedIn, paintjet.com, and then of course if there's any, you're welcome to share my contact information as well.
not hard to find. Nick at PaintJet, thank you so much, and best of luck moving forward. You're on to something.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate it.